Elon Musk recently triggered fierce online arguments with a tweet about Japan's falling birth rate. He said, "At the risk of stating the obvious, unless something changes to cause the birth rate to exceed the death rate, Japan will eventually cease to exist. This would be a great loss for the world." Is this true? According to the Child Population Clock, published by Tohoku University's Laboratory on the Economics of Aging, if the rate of decline continues at the current rate, the number of Japanese children will theoretically reach 1 by the 5th of October 2966. This assumes that everything remains the same for almost 1,000 years. As many intellectuals have pointed out, Japan's future population also depends on other factors, for example, the net immigration, the number of people moving into Japan from abroad, minus the number of people moving out of Japan. Even so, we should be grateful to Musk, because his tweet made Japanese people realize how serious the declining birth rate has become. Why people do not want to have children in Japan? You may be asking. It seems there may be 3 primary reasons, which to some degree are all interconnected. First, and perhaps foremost, is the gender gap. Japan ranks 116th, out of 156 countries, in the 2022 Gender Gap Index, published by the World Economic Forum. Research shows Japanese women's wages are 24.5% lower than men's, which is the second worst in the world, and the proportion of women in secure, full-time employment is 46.6%, which is about half the proportion of men. In addition, even women in full employment are estimated to spend 5 times the number of hours on domestic chores and childcare duties. Traditionally, there was an automatic expectation that after getting married women would no longer remain part of the workforce. But in addition to a real terms fall in salary levels over several decades, a decline in job security for men has created a situation where married couples, especially those with children, cannot afford to be single-income households. Even so, opportunities for women to rejoin the workforce after raising children remain limited. The second important reason for low birth rates is thought to be low public spending to support children and childcare. In Japan, child welfare spending is considerably lower as a percentage of GDP, compared with other developed countries. Generally speaking, the cost of bringing one child to adulthood, assuming the child goes to university, is estimated to be 30 million yen, which is equivalent of $300,000. Average salaries have remained the same for 30 years, despite a steady increase in the cost of living, including educational expenses. So in fact, there are many people who simply can't afford children, no matter how much they might want them. The third key factor is Japan's failure to recognize that the traditional, nuclear family is far from the only viable environment in which children can thrive. Actually, the number of children born to married women has not changed much since the 1950s. It is simply that the number of women who are willing to get married has continued to decrease. Therefore, naturally, this means the number of children born each year has been decreasing. In Japan, as elsewhere, being a single mother is extremely difficult economically. However, sharp social prejudice against single mothers also still persists. In other developed countries, it has become acceptable for families to take many different forms. For example, in France, the proportion of what Japan still considers to be illegitimate children is 60%. In Japan, this figure is closer to 2%. An indication, perhaps, of Japan's premier ranking when it comes to social stigma. However, a recent survey by the Cabinet Office suggests that addressing the 3 key factors may not be enough to reverse Japan's declining birth rate. The survey shows that 70% of men in their 20s do not have a spouse, and 40% of them have never even been on date. Despite mixed schooling, traditionally, Japanese culture is very homosocial, and some psychologists suggested that many young people find relationships troubling, and largely an additional source of anxiety. Another university professor suggested that the need to fall in love may be disappearing, with the increase in smartphone games, virtual companions, and other entertainment that can be enjoyed alone. Generally speaking, Japanese mainstream media does not hold the government to account, and will go to considerable lengths to provide reasons why social issues are the sole responsibility of individuals. This Cabinet Office report became a hot topic across mass media. Vox pops with men in their 40s and 50s, decrying the lack of guts shown by young people, become the standard way to sensationalize the findings and dodge any need to dig deeper than the usual clickbait. The media consensus is that young people are solely to blame for the declining birth rate. However, if you look at the results of the same survey from 1987, you find that the numbers are similar. In other words, young Japanese men's views on relationships haven't changed over the last 35 years. Those opinionated men in their 40s and 50s clearly have short memories. Moreover, the actual, primary focus of the survey was to investigate division of labor within families with regard to household chores. It was not to check young people's dating experiences or their attitudes to marriage. It's questionable whether these secondary findings are even accurate, given that the survey was designed for an entirely different purpose. Perhaps, it is important to note that the primary audience for legacy media is the over 60s. International reports about Japan's aging population invariably fail to mention that they still dominate government and the boards of Japan's influential megacorporations. But despite the strong cultural focus on social harmony, and the claim of every major business that they serve society, there is in fact very little evidence that the Japanese notion of society has progressed beyond the kind of hypocritical yardstick of 19th century, which means pointing out individual failings, without any real sense of collective responsibility. Hence, 35 years of impotent efforts to address those 1987 findings are not considered significant. One of the blessings of old age is, after all, a short memory and a rose-tinted addiction to nostalgia. If Japan seriously wants to increase the birth rate, recognizing and addressing gender disparities is an overdue priority. In an age of social media, more than ever this is an unconscious source of social anxiety. But this would require a more widespread shift in consciousness. Semi-pornographic, manga images of cute, impossibly busty young girls in scanty outfits are well known across the world. It is reasonable to assume that they nurture wholly unrealistic expectations in young men, and provide a further source of anxiety for body-conscious young women. Less well known abroad is Japan's murky idol culture. Management companies will often recruit underage girls to form groups that perform songs by established writers, many of whom are old enough to be their grandfather. In recent years, there have been numerous reports about punishing work schedules, power harassment, and the kind of sexual misconduct that gave birth to Me Too. In extreme cases, this has led to very young, teenage girls committing suicide. Although local commentators consider it was an effort to curry favor with Japanese youth and improve the status of the Tesla brand in Japan, among Musk's other recent tweets was a reference to a popular character in a game that allows players to become an idol manager. With his tweet, Elon Musk opted to promote a cartoon character with a meticulously constructed backstory, who declares herself to be the cutest wannabe idol. There is speculation that Musk discovered the game on 4chan, which isn't exactly famous for its feminist credentials. Irrespective of his motives or level of knowledge about the less savory side of idol management, Musk's tweets beg an important question. If Japan ceased to exist, what exactly is it that he would miss? Historically speaking, Japan struggles to recognize the value of its more positive aspects until they are celebrated by foreign commentators, as we saw in the episode of Katsushika Hokusai. Therefore, avoiding the populist sensationalism that social media amplifies, and the prurient celebration of Japan's less savory cultural exports, is perhaps an important step towards a more mature, responsible and healthy Japanese society. A society that isn't such a major source of anxiety for young people.